Is it sad that all I want now is a biopic by Fincher that details what made Orson Welles choose to do those champagne commercials with the famous outtakes?
Ah, the French champagne.
Action, please.
Ah, the French.
So yeah, I just finished watching Mank on Netflix, which dropped yesterday. The latest movie from director David Fincher that strives to tell the behind-the-scenes story of the origin for the screenplay for Citizen Kane. The movie's titled Mank, of course, for the titular character, Herman J. Mankiewicz, the writer on Citizen Kane, and his kind of storied connection with characters such as Marion Davies, William Randolph Hearst, and all the bigwigs of Hollywood at that time, and, you know, seeks to delve into the motivations for him wanting to pen this story, so to speak, as well as getting into a little bit of his collaboration with Welles. And like a lot of biopics, I tend to go in very skeptical of the legitimacy of certain events and certain characterizations, just because I know biopics tend to put something of a veneer or a glean on their subject matter that documentaries just don't have sometimes. I'd say the closest to a biopic that felt as though it was staying true to form that I've seen in recent memory was probably Spotlight. But with this one, it obviously isn't a documentary. It's taking a very stylized approach. It's based off of a treatment that Fincher's father wrote before he passed away. And this has apparently been a long-standing passion project that Fincher's wanted to put into production, I think ever since he finished up the game. Certainly, I expect liberties and exaggerations to be taken, and even inaccuracies. So I'm not even going to address those outright, just because it's not my place to really draw the strong comparisons. I'm sure there are many other video essayists and critics out there who are much more knowledgeable on the behind the scenes of Orson Welles and Citizen Kane and on the history of Hearst himself. A lot of what I've absorbed when it comes to William Randolph Hearst and Citizen Kane really just comes from a basic knowledge of, yes, Kane is a thinly veiled parallel to this actual person, this actual newspaper magnate who was larger than life, flaunted his wealth and his power. That's most of my own personal knowledge on the subject of Hearst and Kane, is just the basics. Going in knowing okay, I know he's going to show up. I know they're going to address something having to do with the relationship between him and Mank, and what they felt contested over, and why this would probably prompt Mank to undertake basically a character assassination in the form of the Kane character. On that front, I'd say it's a fine enough piece of entertainment if you're going in just to kind of follow that story and that story alone, and kind of check the more seeking out actual events and comparing them to this clearly skewed account of things. It reminded me a lot of Ed Wood, and no, not just because it's shot in black and white, but because Ed Wood was a movie that certainly took a fair amount of liberty with representing not just Ed Wood, the man, but a lot of other people surrounding him, and those times wherein he was putting Plan 9 from Outer Space into production. It tries to cast certainly a more honest light on characters such as Bela Lugosi or Tor Johnson or people like that, but not necessarily the most accurate representations. They'll have their own flourishes, their own exaggerations, because that's what's needed to keep narrative flow going, as opposed to probably the real life story, which was very probably pedestrian or very just run-of-the-mill. It's not going to be as engaging if there isn't some high melodrama, really. And I feel a lot of that probably can be said for this one, too, in that I'm sure characterizations of certain people in this story are exaggerated, are puffed up a little bit for the sake of we need to kind of hold the audience's attention. Otherwise, showing them play by play the accurate account of things will be very boring, because I can see a lot of certain moments in this movie kind of playing out just standard as they would in actual real life and might not be the most general audience engaging. So I understand those are the sacrifices a filmmaker probably has to do for the sake of entertainment, is to really kind of put an exaggerated spin on certain moments. Whether or not this is legitimately what happened, probably not. But as a movie on its own, I think it's perfectly fine on a technical level with regards to setup and shots, with regards to the composition within the frame, and overall performances. It's really well done. I feel Fincher just gets better and better with his craft as he goes along. At no point does it feel like he's really slouching on the work he's putting into this picture, even though he is doing a lot of different things here, which some of it pays off, some of it might need a little tweaking, but at the same time, it's something new that he's adding to his bag of tricks. With regards to this, it genuinely feels like he's trying to recapture a little bit of that old school Hollywood feel to this movie in order to do sort of an homage, not just to that time period, but perhaps to the setup of Citizen Kane and the direction of Citizen Kane itself, which Orson Welles would probably take umbrage with. I feel like I say umbrage a lot in my videos now, but I feel Orson would definitely take umbrage with, because I believe I saw a clip of an interview at one point where he said he hated the idea of homages and just thinks of them as the lowest form of things you could do creatively with your product. He might have not liked this movie just because it might not have been a flattering representation of him, even though Orson really isn't in this movie that much. He's more of an enigmatic figure. He shows up a little bit towards the beginning, and then for a final scene in the end where the actor playing Orson Welles, I believe his name is Tom Burke, I believe, he just lets his acting fly, and you see Orson flip the fuck out over a writing credit. So, he's used sparingly enough, which would be fine, because otherwise you'd probably be distracted by the idea of someone's trying to do an Orson Welles impression. He does a good job, but I feel the focus relying with Gary Oldman's Mankiewicz was a good choice to take for the screenplay. I feel as though keeping Orson in the background and really kind of focusing in on the guy who, for all intents and purposes, chronicles Hearst, to the best of his ability due to his own personal connection with him, was the better choice. And that, leaving Welles kind of as this enigmatic figure who keeps, propelling his writer further and further until they reach an impasse, fine. Good. And then I felt halfway through the movie, as it starts to address certain societal and political upheaval issues that were taking place in the mid-30s at that time, especially in California, it kind of loses its focus, I feel, a little bit. And part of it, I feel, is also a detriment to the film in that while we know that this is about Mank and his very contentious relationship with Hearst and his circle of people, and with the system of Hollywood in general, we rarely see that put into full effect. It's more kind of hearsay and mentioned. Charles Dance, who plays William Randolph Hearst, and he's really good in this role quite a bit. He's still intimidating as hell, even though he's got minimal screen time and is a little bit more refined. there is this scene that builds up towards the end where a drunken Mank basically calls out Hearst on his bullshit, but it never felt as though like that was earned, because we never saw much of the back and forth between Hearst and Mank, outside of like Mank just witnesses the ramifications of some things Hearst may or may not have had huge influence on, such as the gubernatorial election of 1934, I believe, where Upton Sinclair lost to Merriam. And Upton Sinclair, I will say, good casting on that one. Bill Nye the Science Guy is Upton Sinclair. Solid choice, Fincher. Throughout it all, as they start to focus more on this, more on how Mank starts to view the upper echelon of Hollywood elitism, and Hearst in particular, it didn't seem to have as much emotional connection to it as I think Fincher was wanting it to. In other words, I never felt as though Mank was thoroughly affected by what was taking place around him to warrant the decision to pen this screenplay, which would essentially slam the character of Hearst and the character of Marion Davies, even though that's probably something he didn't really want to do. So a lot of it came off kind of, I guess, half-hearted. And I hate to say that about a Fincher movie and about a Gary Oldman performance, because Gary Oldman's really good in this. I do like what he's doing. He is as solid as he's ever been in the movie, but it just feels like the character of Mank himself just seems so kind of disconnected from events transpiring around him, even though there are moments where he should be a little bit more invested, like when one of his close friends reveals he has Parkinson's and has guilt and grief over having to contribute to MGM's campaign to produce propaganda against Sinclair, because he genuinely wants to support Sinclair's ideals and so forth, but he has to produce smear campaign against them, and so he commits suicide. And we only get a glimpse of Mank intervening on that part, but we never really get too much of a sense of his thoughts or feelings after the fact, when this individual commits suicide, when a lot of his long-standing rivals in the industry end up either just kind of fading into the background or retiring or passing away. He's too much of an enigma in his performance. It's a well-done performance, but it's still too mysterious that it doesn't emotionally resonate with me as much as other performances have in the past. So when it comes to him at the end being like, no, I want to take credit for this statement against this former friend of mine, that doesn't feel like it's really earned itself. It doesn't feel like he's actually arrived to that point. And maybe part of it has to do that he's playing a character who I'm going to say is 90% sloshed throughout the story of this movie. That was one thing that quickly kind of drew my attention, but then I kind of dismissed it after I thought about it a little bit, was that he's supposed to be 43 in this movie. And he and Amanda Seyfried, who plays Marion Davis in this movie, are supposed to both be 43. Neither of them look like they're 43. I probably believe Amanda Seyfried more so than Gary Oldman, because she's actually closer to that age. Gary Oldman's, I believe, in his 60s. But then I thought, this guy's been chain smoking left and right. He hides alcohol in, all sorts of places and so forth. He lives hard. So, maybe it's just like, yeah, the mileage just shows a lot more on him. And that's the angle Fincher's going for when using Oldman as Mankiewicz. But my suspension of disbelief couldn't let that go. Maybe just because it is Gary Oldman and he is so recognizable to me at this point, that to kind of buy into him playing this haggard-looking 43-year-old next to Amanda Seyfried, who, while she's closer to age in that, she does not look it, and she's actually like really, really good in this movie too. Like, I kind of wish there was a spin-off now that was a Marion Davies centric movie, because she actually plays into this period and this particular type of performance really well. And there are just glimmers of, what would be emulated in Citizen Kane that she picks up on and goes with very well there. But yeah, that age thing at first was just a little jarring to me, and as much as I was trying to will myself into buying, like, he's just a hard drinker and he just looks awful because of that, I still couldn't let it go. So that's my own burden that I have to bear on this movie. My thoughts are all over the place right now because I just got done watching it, and it is one of those movies, like a lot of Fincher movies that I enjoy or that I find investment in, that I will probably come back to and have to watch again and again now that I kind of know the pacing of it, now that I do have a certain idea or angle to approach it with, and look for certain kind of signifiers or clues within either the text or within the way that they frame things. It wasn't nearly as Fincherized as a lot of his past stuff. And I'm still trying to figure out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like I said, he's trying something different here, and I can respect him on that front. But it is more kind of a standard setup for a film of that era. There's one moment that did get into the surreal quite a bit, which was the election night scene, wherein it goes into this montage of them tallying the votes and so forth, and Mankiewicz, again, Goldman's playing him stone-faced throughout this entire ordeal, even though he and his wife genuinely just express outright that they kind of grin and bear it here, as they got to be around all these elitist, like, conservative folks that want to just prove Sinclair wrong and so forth. And for a while it gets into the surreal there, as you kind of just see him looking around the room, and there's a sense of, like, heightened reality that he's witnessing amongst the other patrons, amongst the festivities taking place, and that it's supposed to kind of feel either surreal or sinister or kind of off-kilter. There's not a lot of that I picked up on in this particular film, because, like I said, when he's not trying to kind of ape the style and choices that Wells took for, like, setting up shots or setting up the pacing of a scene, it's pretty standard fare. It's well done standard fare, but it's nothing that really grabbed me so much as that one scene. I know one thing that's been kind of coming up in my social media feed after I watched the film. I kind of checked a couple of things on Twitter. One thing that's been coming up is the quality of the actual visual aspect of the movie itself, wherein it is shot digitally, and I've seen people have different accounts of, like, the black and white aesthetic on their TV screens doesn't work for them, or doesn't pop quite as much as it would for, say, an older film that was actually shot on, like, black and white film and set to, like, a big theatrical screen. I didn't really notice that too much on my viewing. I definitely could sense that it was a more standard, like, digital film presentation, but nothing really distracted me through it. Maybe perhaps it's a little bit more of a grayscale than a black and white that I'm accustomed to, especially when it comes to older films, but I feel that's something that really we haven't seen since the days of Ed Wood, for example. Nothing to, like, I recall even, like, The Good German from 2006, like, it had that black and white aesthetic, but also you could tell there was a little bit more of a grayish, like, type of quality to the film there, or to the, it wasn't quite as dirtied, I guess, as some of the older films would be. Every once in a while he'll throw in his cigarette butt burn into the film. That was probably the most distracting thing, because I'm like, dude, I know it's not on actual film. You don't have to try to trick me as a viewer with that. Like, there's not nearly enough film grain or nearly enough, like, scratching or distortion for it to try to convince me that it's anything but digital. So that was a little weird. But other than that, I'd recommend Mank for anyone who is stuck with Fincher thus far. I feel it's just another fairly solid addition to his catalog. It's going to take me repeat viewings to really formulate whether or not it ranks up there with the likes of Zodiac, which is, again, my all-time favorite Fincher movie. But it's something I definitely want to watch again. It's definitely an acting tour de force, even though Gary Oldman, I've seen him do better, and he's in the character of Mank just seems a little perhaps too nebulous. He's too much of a sphinx, I guess, that it's hard to peg down, what exactly is so enticing about this performance, but it does draw me in. Like, he plays sloshed. Whether he's playing it accurately or cartoonishly, he plays sloshed very well. Again, Amanda Seyfried, Charles Dance, solid performances all around. All in all, it was an enjoyable watch. I didn't regret watching it. At no point did I really feel it was dragging on me. Just a couple of curiouser moments that I ended up kind of like questioning again after the fact, after I got out of being like, is this what he actually intended, or is the message a little muddled? But again, it's something that kept me engaged at least. So there you go. Mank. Go see it, kiddos, on your home viewing experiences, old-timey-wimey. If I had a cigarette, I'd light it up here and blow smoke at you because it's hazy. God, I'm such a dork.